interesting, especially in terms of what's happening today with the economy in China continually facing problems, and yet the decision is greater and greater party centralization and control over the private sector.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people really should recognize about the Chinese Communist Party is that it seems to be incapable of reforming itself. And we're seeing that in the management of the economy today, with falling growth rate and increasing throttling of anything that's private sector, not least in high tech, because it plainly represents a threat to the sort of Leninist economics that Xi Jinping and others believe in.
Going back to Hong Kong, I'm just curious, what was the feeling you had in the city in the lead up to the handover? Because the Sino-British Joint Declaration was made in 1984. You became governor in 1992. Was it there the sense that this was this impending doom that was coming, or that maybe they would stick to it and 50 years later the Communist Party would have reformed and changed and things would work out? What was the feeling?
Well, by and large, there was a degree of optimism, mainly because I think people thought, what the hell's the future unless we're optimistic? What punctured that a bit was the killings in Tiananmen Square in 1989. I happened to be there because I was at the time, because of the job I had in the British government, I was the vice chairman of the Asia Development Bank. And the Asia Development Bank was having an annual meeting in Beijing, at which the big issue was thought to be the seating of Taiwan for the first time in a board meeting. As it turned out, the big event was the student demonstrations. And you really had a sense that you were living in a revolution, that you were living during an extraordinary period of liberation. It's the most exciting time I've had in my life. I had to leave about 3 or 4 days before the shooting started and the tanks went in. But a friend of mine who was one of the best journalists I've ever known, he wrote for The Observer, and he was a great China scholar. And his description of what happened was stomach-turning. He was standing with a group of students in the square, and they started hearing pop, 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 pop. And the student next to him said, "Don't worry, Grandpa." He said to my friend, "Don't worry, Grandpa. They're not using live rounds." At which point this kid fell into my friend's arms, blood coming out of a hole in the middle of his forehead. And one forgets now how a moment of great optimism was cut down by the leadership and the People's Liberation Army. And that really did have an effect on Hong Kong and encouraged us to make more generous arrangements for people to leave Hong Kong with British citizenship, which some of them did. My predecessor managed, I think, to calm things down quite a bit because it was still some way to go before 1997. Nevertheless, it did cause a degree of panic. And one of the challenges I had from 92, 97 was to manage the economy, even though there was this uncertainty about what was going to happen in 1997. And the fact that we got through without a collapse in the stock market, in the exchange rate, in housing policy, the fact that we got through without that was quite a triumph. and indicated the underlying strength of the Hong Kong economy, which had been growing for 25 years. I mean, I've been a lifetime politician, at least until the last few years when I've been at Oxford. But I'd never before been in a position in government where you could every year cut taxes from already low levels, increase public spending, and increase the amount of money in the reserve. And that we were able to do for all 5 years I was in Hong Kong. Because of the public spending increase, the Chinese communists used to call me a socialist. And they were always waiting for things to blow up, and they didn't. The economy was remarkably sound. And that's a tribute to the people who were managing it, and a tribute to the entrepreneurial spirit of people in Hong Kong, and for their sort of intimate understanding of economic realities. So I suppose that was the Tiananmen was the nearest thing to making people take fright, reminding them of what Chinese communism really was all about. I'm always anxious to distinguish between China and Chinese people and the Communist Party. Because the people who work for me in Hong Kong, the best civil servants I've ever had, were Chinese patriots. But they didn't believe they had to define their patriotism in terms of their enthusiasm for the Communist Party. And it's so I've always wanted to say to people I'm a huge admirer of Chinese people and of China, but think that the Chinese Communist Party is a disaster.